how how Buddhists treat death. So when we think about death, the Buddha teaches us that, of course, and of course, just our own mind teaches us that we don't like death. We fear death, not only our death, but the death of our loved ones, because we don't want to lose them. So, uh, death is something that, if we had a list, if people made a list of what they fear most in life, most people would have death as their number one list, as their number one on their list. I've always felt a little different about that. I always felt like becoming one of those vegetable type people where you can't move anything and you're stuck in your own body is probably worse than death, but but that's just me. So, growing up, I I experienced a lot of death in my life in my 34 years. The three of you guys know here, I lost my wife 6 years ago. My first death that I can remember was my grandfather when I was age 10. Um, and I always kind of felt that it was a little weird that, at the funerals and stuff, there's people always crying and screaming, and it always felt so uncomfortable to be in a place like that with people like that. And as I got older, I always and I found out about like different cultures and what they do in terms of death. I always like what the Irish do, how they prop up the dead person in the coffin and give them a beer. I always thought, what? No, that's a good way to treat. That's a good way to treat death. I like it. I said so. I would always say, if when I die, that's what I want to happen. I want everybody to, instead of everybody crying and screaming, I want everybody to be laughing and having fun and partying. And I still believe that to this day. Actually, there's always something. I guess I had an innate thing in me that I feel is one of the reasons why my worldview fits in Buddhism so well, is that I always felt that there's really not much to fear about death. Obviously, when I was younger, I never necessarily feared about death myself, like my own death, but I did fear for my parents. Like when I first got to the point where I could realize, like, wow, like my parents could die and they wouldn't be there anymore. I could remember like crying and stuff, literally like staying up at night and crying and worrying about like my parents are going to die at any second. And of course, that's something that we as kids probably all go through, and even as adults, we start to worry about these things. And death is what the old saying goes. There's two things you can't avoid: death and taxes. And in Buddhism, the things that you can't avoid, we basically learn to accept. So in Buddhism, one of the biggest things is that the Buddha taught was meditation on death, meditation on the body, meditating that all things are impermanent. And when you meditate on the body, that the body is made up of these 32, 34 parts, that it's skin and bone, and and it's subject to sickness, old age, and death. The Buddha had the five remembrances, and three of those is always remember that I am subject to sickness, old age, and death, and I have not yet gone beyond that. So the Buddha is always trying to teach us to think about death, to keep death in our mind. And in our Western society today, we think when you hear that, you say that's really morbid. Like who wants to think about death all the time? That's like we're supposed to be living and having fun and all that. And the funny thing is though, when you really start to think about death, personally, I think that you start to enjoy life a little bit more. You start to let go and you start to understand things a little bit more. So life is actually better. In a lot of ways, it's not about the quantity of your life or how long you lived. It's about how well you lived, the quality of your life. And when it comes to death, it's one of those things that in Buddhism teaches us that death can come at any moment, at any second, for anyone. And it could be for an infant, it could be for a 10-year-old girl, it could be for a 97-year-old person. It doesn't matter. Death comes for all of us at any time. And there's a lot of injustices that we feel about death. We feel that if somebody who's young that dies, oh, that's an injustice. And obviously that's something I lived through myself. My wife was 25 years old when she died, and being in the whole cancer thing for 4 years, we met many, many young children, and 3, 4-year-old girls and boys with shaved heads and stuff like that, and most people just, I don't know, they can't fathom that. You can't fathom that these little kids that barely had any time to live their lives, now they're dealing with this illness that they can possibly die from. And in Buddhism, there's a couple answers to that. Some people will say, depending on what type of Buddhism and what people believe, they'll say, oh, that's their karma. If they die young, they were bad in a former life or something like that. And is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. But the biggest thing for us in terms of karma, especially when it comes to stuff like death, is sure, it is possible that if you die young, it's because you were bad in a former life. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is how you create karma in your present life at the present time. And if you see that a lot of people, if you're around people who are like terminal, their mindset changes. They come to, a lot of them come to like accept and just let go and be at peace with whatever's going to happen. You talk to people who've had cancer and they say, well, that's like the best thing that's ever happened to them in their lives, because it totally changed their mindset. And just talking to people in general, those who have escaped death in some way or another, it helps to teach you how to live life. So whether it's your karma or not in Buddhism, we don't know. It's not something that we can pinpoint. We're not going to be able to say, I know why this 4-year-old girl has cancer, because 5 lives ago she was a mass murderer. It doesn't matter. Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't, but it doesn't matter one bit, because what matters is what we do with this 5-year-old girl while she's alive now, what she does, how she lives her life, how the family lives a life. And going back to the whole injustice thing, obviously we feel like there is an injustice when a young person dies, or something. Even if it's just like a 45-year-old person, you hear like a 45-year-old person who dies of a heart attack, and we say, wow, they were so young. Because 300 years ago people barely lived past 25, and now it's like 45, 50. Wow, that's young. I can't believe they died so young. There's a great story. I'm not exactly sure what the origin of the story is, but I did hear it from Ajahn Brahm, like I hear many of my good stories. And it's a story about the tree in the forest during a storm. And I don't necessarily remember the specifics, but in terms of what happens is there's this guy, and he goes out, there's this big storm, and he goes out of his house and into the forest after the storm, and he looks at the trees, and he sees tons of leaves on the ground, and he looks up at the trees, and he sees that the trees still have some leaves as well. Not all the leaves fell, and he starts to look at the leaves, and he sees that there were the leaves on the ground. There's many types. There's old, shriveled up brown leaves, and there's tons of, brand new green leaves on the ground. Of course, there's more, older leaves that fell than younger leaves. Then you look up at the tree, and on the tree, there's plenty of green leaves, but there's also some old, stubborn, brown leaves that are still there. Even after a huge storm, they're still hanging on. And the moral of the story is that that's nature. So, and that equates to us humans. We are the leaves as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be karma or God or any reason why somebody died young, or somebody died in a horrible plane accident or something like that. There doesn't necessarily have to be a reason. It could be nature. And it is nature, it is truth, that we don't all live, grow old until we're 90 years old and then die of old age. That's just the way things are. That is the nature of our existence. So, we have to, as Buddhist practitioners, we have to start to view death in a different light. And really, it doesn't matter whether you believe in reincarnation or not. What really matters is viewing death in the right light allows you to live a better life. And whether it's one life or a billion lives, who knows? It doesn't really matter either. But what really matters is living life here and now the right way. So, I just went blank. So anyways, where was I going with this? Yes. So like I was saying, the Buddha and the scriptures, they tell us about being aware of death. And there's one part of the suttas where the Buddha asked Venerable Ananda. Venerable Ananda is one of the famous monks back then. And he says, "How often do you think of death?" And Venerable Ananda said, 4 to 5 times a day. And the Buddha scolded him and he says, "Don't be so lazy. How could you only think of death 4 to 5 times a day? You should think of death in every breath." And if we take that literally, if we look at that, how many of us can really think about death every time we breathe throughout the day? I don't think we could necessarily think about anything anytime we breathe throughout the day. But I think what the Buddha was going at with that is that when we observe the breath, the whole point of observing the breath in terms of meditation is to observe impermanence. And death is impermanence, really. Impermanence means everything is constantly changing. Nothing ever stays the same. Nothing lives forever. There's not one thing in this universe that is eternal. And that even goes for the stars and the universes themselves. One day, all of the energy and all of the stars of the universe will be used up. And the universe itself will go black. It will die. There won't be anything left. So even something from down to the lowest amoeba, to the lowest ant, to us, up to the universe itself, all things are born, grow old, grow sick, and die. That is the ultimate truth. And when we come to realize this truth, that the only thing permanent is impermanence, and we start to let go, it's like we're lifting a burden from our backs. So we why do we worry about death? And I often, like, when I talk to people about death, I've always, I would say personally that I do believe in reincarnation, and the reason why I do believe in it is because for some reason I've always felt that that was the best way for me. Like, I always thought, like, growing up, I was like, I think that would be kind of cool, like, to come back again, because I always wanted, like, I think about, like, oh man, I'm not going to be around, like, for in 500 years to see when they have, like, spaceships going to different planets and all these kind of cool things. And it's like, it would be kind of cool to come back and be alive to see that again. And now, as I get older and I start to see the truth in things, I start to see that that's like my craving, my wanting to see things and exist. And now, as I get older and I get more into Buddhism and understanding, I realize that no, I don't want to come back. If reincarnation is true, yeah, I'm done. So this life, no more. After this life, I don't want to come back again. But so yeah, just like even and even I would think, like, have these things like, oh yeah, I think I was like Julius Caesar in a former life or something like that. But whether you neither as an animal, no. Well, in Buddhist thought and Buddhist cosmology, becoming like, if I was like you have to work really hard to become a human in the whole reincarnation thing. Like, when you become a human, that's like after, like, untold amounts of lives as lower beings. So in Buddhist, like, going back to becoming an animal would almost be like going backwards. It's like being a bad person, and then you'd come back as an animal, something like that. So no, I don't think I'd want to come back. Although I'll tell you, some of these dogs and cats are pretty lazy. It would be people. You always hear people say that, like, in my next life, I want to come back as an animal. I want to come back as a dog or a cat. Yeah. 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 So while all of us lose, or will lose, those that we are closest with. None of us live forever. So whether we lose our family and our friends and our loved ones young in life or later in life, we will all go through that separation. That's the first noble truth. The first noble truth is separation from the pleasing. And of course, while we're being separated from the pleasing, we're going to be joined with the unpleasing. We're going to be joined with it. So all the people we love are going to die, and then we're going to be stuck with all these people we don't like anymore. That's the nature of things. That's just the way it is. But so any comments or questions up to this point? Still got a couple more minutes in the talking part of this. But we'll go as long as we have questions and as long as we talk. So the main point of my talk today is to develop a an awareness of death so that you can develop a fearlessness of death. Whether, you know, going back to what I was saying um, about how when I talk to people about death, I always say, listen, there's not much to worry about with death. I always say, okay, if you die and you're a good person and there's a heaven and a hell, okay, you go to heaven. If you die and there's literally nothing after, you don't exist at all, why worry? You're not going to be around to worry about it after you die anyway. So why worry about it while you're living? You know? If you're reincarnated and if there's reincarnation and you're a good person, okay, fine. You may come back as you're going to come back in another life. So there's really no reason to fear death. And I find it funny Like, and Denise, you might enjoy this as well because we have the same similar backgrounds. My mother, who's supposedly a very devout Catholic, you can tell. I mean, she's just like most people, in that she fears death. And I think to myself, if I totally believe that there was this God, and when I died I went to heaven, I wouldn't worry about it, man. Hell, whenever I die, I die. I'd be like, hey, take me now. Why am I stuck on this planet? So death is not necessarily something to fear, no matter what you believe. I always tell people, like, the only way, like, if you're a good person, the only way that you would need to fear death is if there was some kind of what they call bizarro universe where the people who were good went to hell and the people who were bad went to heaven. If that was the truth of what happened after you die, then I'd be pretty much screwed. Most of us would be pretty screwed. We'd be like, oh man, I should have been bad while I had the chance and lived it up. So I mean, and who knows? Nobody really knows what happens after death. I mean, in terms of Buddhism, they say that as you become a higher practitioner, a higher meditator, and you reach levels of meditation, you actually are able to know your past lives, and that's something that I'm probably nowhere even close to. So I can't say that I know for a fact that reincarnation exists. I can only say that I believe it, and I say that out of the fact that it truly is, for me. It's just a belief at this point. I can't say yes that it is true because I don't really know. If I ever get to that point where I do start seeing my past lives, then I'll say, okay, fine, yeah, then that's really what happened. But death is not something to fear, no matter what you believe, unless you're a bad person. Then I would say probably, okay, maybe it's time to start changing. Do a Scrooge, and then wake up in the morning and be like, it's time to change my life. Yeah. So, as a Buddhist, in our Buddhist practices, we want to meditate on death, and the best way to do it is to do the five remembrances at first. I am subject to old age, and have not gone beyond old age. I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. All that is dear and pleasing to me, I will one day be separated from. And then the fifth one is that my actions are my only true belongings. My actions are the only things that I truly own in this world. And whatever I do, for bad or for good, I'm going to have to deal with the consequences of my actions. So the five remembrances, which the Buddhists say that this should be thought on very often as possible. And of course, death being the most important part of that, at least, or one of the most important parts. If you're able to say those five remembrances on a regular basis, you do start to realize what the truth is. And really, in Buddhism, the main part, or what you're trying to accomplish, you're not trying to be, you can't try to be enlightened and then it happens. But what you're trying to do in all reality is to see things as they really are. And as you see things as they really are, as you develop a dispassion and lessen your attachments because you're seeing things as they really are, then your fear goes. The biggest thing, those who are enlightened are fearless. Fearlessness is a huge part of the Buddhist practice. And when you don't have any fear, you can live with freedom, because fear can be in itself chains that hold you down, that keep you from being free. Of course, that doesn't mean if you become fearless, you're gonna start jumping out of planes and doing bungee jumping and being all crazy or anything like that. But just means that you can live free of that fear that holds us all down, that keeps us from truly living, from truly being in the moment and truly experiencing this existence that we have, that we're in right now. So, any comments or questions at this point? Well, I'm glad then. It's funny, that seems to happen because there's been plenty of times where I've listened to talks and stuff like that, and I was like, wow, this is just like perfect. This is exactly what I needed. And if me doing a talk helps somebody like that, then I can't ask for anything more. That's great. So it's really why I do this. You know, and I have Delani knows that I always have my doubts about why I am even doing this, because, like I always say, I'm not a monk, I'm not a master, I'm not, you know, anybody who I guess you would necessarily consider qualified with a piece of paper to talk about this stuff. But, what I do, if it helps people, that's great. If it doesn't, then I get to stop, and maybe I'll get to go play video games instead. No, but I like doing this. I'll keep doing that. I'll keep doing this. I'll keep trying to help people as much as I can. It's worth it. So, yeah. But the Delani talked to me about when I first talked to her about these kind of doubts that I have, and she said that her master talked to her about how even having the beginner mind and learning from being able to learn something from anybody, whether you think he's the littlest kid or the oldest person or the most wise person or even maybe the most foolish person. And Venerable Sariputta, back in the Buddhist day, he said that he would listen to, even if the youngest novice had criticism for him or had knowledge, that he would listen to them. So, who knows? Yeah, but anyways, thank you very much, and I appreciate you coming to this talk and participating. So until next time, Suki Hantu, may you be happy. And Yippee, definitely check out the that calendar. There's always plenty of stuff going on. There's a lot of talks that are even better than this. I think I love listening to the monastics talk, because they have a lot of insight. So they're who I go to for these kind of things. Thank you. Yeah, well, that in 92. We all go through this. It's something that not one person that ever existed can. There's a great story from the suttas about this woman, and you kind of hear it like it's almost similar to stories of in the Bible about Jesus. The story was that this woman had just lost her son, her infant son or something like that, and she thought, she heard that the Buddha was coming to the town, and back then, like, all these mystical, magical people that can that can bring people back to life and perform all these miracles and stuff like that. And she came up to the Buddha and she said, "My son has died. Can you help him? Can you bring him back?" And he said, "Yes, I can bring him back." And the Buddha said, "Find me a mustard seed from one house in this whole town that has never experienced a death. Bring it back, and I'll bring back your son." And so the mother went nuts. She went all around the town trying to find a place. So one place that never experienced a death, a mustard seed from there. Yeah, it's a very poignant, very common story that's told. Um, and of course, she couldn't find one because every household had experienced a death, one death or another. And so she went back to the Buddha and distraught, and she said, I couldn't find one." And he basically said, "Such is life. All things are impermanent. All compound things are ever changing. Death comes to all of us. There is not one person in this life who will go through life not experiencing any death." Yep. So whether we lost whoever we lost and however long ago we lost it, it's death is something that we're always dealing with. Even some of us who are dealing with terminal illnesses are dealing with death even while we're living. You know, there's a one woman who used to come. I haven't seen her in a while. Delani, I don't know if you remember her name, but she used to come to the talks a lot, and she was fighting terminal cancer. So, and I don't, hopefully everything's okay. But if she died, then she died. I don't know. Sounds so heartless saying that. It doesn't like Buddhists like, oh man, what a bunch of heartless sons of. There's a great story from Ajahn Brahm, and he's talking about his master Ajahn Chah, who's a very famous monk. Ajahn Brahm was talking about how when he was a young monk, and he was in Thailand. He's a Westerner. He's from England, and he went to Thailand to become a monk. And he got I think it was malaria. I think it was malaria. So anyway, he's like in this hospital bed, and he's like kind of dying from malaria, and he says, "Oh my God, I could." He's like, I couldn't believe that my wise master came to visit me." And he said the master Ajahn Chah, he came and he talked to him, and he said, "Ajahn Brahmasamo," he said, "you'll either die or you'll get better." And that's all the monk said, and he left. so, so you'll, yeah, to our Western ears, that sounds so horrible, doesn't it? That sounds so, but it's such utter truth, and we don't want, especially when it comes to death, we don't want to hear the truth. We don't want to hear the truth one bit. But Buddhist. The reason people come to Buddhism is to find truth, and truth is never easy. There's nothing easy in Buddhism. If there was, everybody would be a Buddhist. So I fully expect that's the kind of answer. That's the kind of what I should get in the hospital if I'm ever maybe dying of something. I want the monk to come in and say, "You'll get better or you'll die. The one thing is for sure, it won't stay that way forever, because nothing ever does. So he'll either get better or he'll die." and I said that to this poor woman, but she understood. I mean, she like is like, "Yes, I agree." And when I told her that story, and I don't know, some people obviously would take that in a bad way, especially people who are not really knowledgeable about Buddhism. But because we want to, when we hear somebody who's sick, we say, "Oh, we'll pray for you to get better," or "We will hope for you to get better." We want to have positive thoughts for the person. But the truth is, they'll get better or they'll die. That's the truth. The truth hurts, as they say. But the truth is the truth. So you can't fight it. Any last comments? If not, then we'll probably end it here. I'm recording this, by the way, so I'm going to put it up on the website. And I had a few comments about the previous talks. I guess some people who hadn't heard the talks have heard them, so that's a good thing. If people, if it helps people. So Yippee, it's good to meet you. Welcome to the Buddhist Center, and I hope you find some insightful talk here, and and anything that you're looking for. And Patakin and Denise, it's always good to see you guys. So, thank you very much, and until next time, Suki Hantu, may you be happy.